Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Fireside Chats, brought to you by RISE Mzansi. My name is Dimpho Lekgeu, and I have the privilege of being your host this evening. For those of you who are new here, Fireside Chats is a platform we created at RISE Mzansi to get to know our leaders better and to get to know the journeys that led them to this point better as activists, as leaders, as patriotic South Africans who are really passionate and are concerned about building the country that we all deserve. And so at RISE Mzansi, we believe in accessible leadership. And so this is about really bringing our leaders closer to us. But before we get started tonight, or maybe I should introduce our guest and then I'll make the announcements. So joining me on tonight's Fireside Chat is RISE Mzansi's Western Cape Premier candidate. His name is Axolile Notywala. He is an exceptional young person. Are you still young? Are you still in the bracket of young? But we'll get into that. An exceptional young person who has dedicated his life and his youth in the service of the people of the Western Cape, and those particularly who are in townships, who are in informal settlements, those people who have really been forgotten by the incumbent government. And he's going to tell us more about his journey later on. But I just wanted to say, hi, Axolile. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hello, Dimpho. Thank you very much for having me, and good evening to you and everyone who's joined.
I feel like I should say finally, because we've been trying for some time to make this happen, but it looks like we're finally going to do it this week. So back to my two announcements before we really immerse ourselves in today's conversation. The first one is that RISE Mzansi has launched what we call the RISE Mzansi Citizens Assemblies. And these are platforms that we created because we really believe in public participation and we want to champion that in the RISE Mzansi way. And so our RISE Mzansi Citizens Assemblies with Mark Hayward bring together a panel of experts and activists, thought leaders and other stakeholders to discuss RISE Mzansi's policy proposals. And we don't do anything for the people without the people. And so we also bring in our organizers, our volunteers, our RISE Mzansi supporters to really interrogate some of these policy positions and determine what is the best way to go about implementing them. And so this week, you may have seen on our social media, we've been focusing on RISE Mzansi's proposals in support of single mothers. And so our first Citizens Assembly spoke to that, and we were joined by incredible panelists, as I mentioned, in Johannesburg to discuss this policy proposal and all of the specific interventions that we outline as part of the policy to support single mothers. So that's the first announcement. The second one is that we got that on camera. So the very first Citizens Assembly will go live on our YouTube page immediately after Fireside Chats. So you can watch what took place in Johannesburg, and please feel free to engage with us. Just because we've had the conversation already does not mean that it has ended. We absolutely invite you to ask questions and to make comments and suggestions. Okay, now that we have all of the admin out of the way, we can get straight into our conversation. Axolile, at the beginning, I mentioned that you are an activist and that you have dedicated your entire life basically to serve communities in the Western Cape, to serve communities in Khayelitsha, where you are from. But I want you to tell us that story this evening. Tell us who Axolile is, where does Axolile come from, and in that, how does Axolile then get to become an activist and get to become a community builder?
Sure. Thank you, Dimpho. I think before I begin with that, I just want to say, particularly to people in the communities that you're talking about, because every day, every morning, we hear something happening in these communities. Very windy in the Western Cape. The weather is brutal, and most of the people that are affected by this weather, whose homes have been blown by the wind, are people living in informal settlements particularly. There are others in formal areas that have also been affected. They will be affected by the rain that's coming tomorrow. Communities will be flooded. And so it is just to say we are with them and we will be with them because we've always been with those communities. And same time, many of the other communities currently, we are having conversations with some of the field organizers of RISE Mzansi. We're trying to organize an event for tomorrow with the national leader, Sonia Zozibi. But people are scared to go out because there's daily gun violence. Today, receiving voice notes of gun violence. And so it is to say everyone in those communities, all these people, they are in our minds, and we're doing this work in relation to these things.
Sure.
Yeah, so Axolile, I still call myself an activist. I think I will always be an activist. I've been an activist since 2008, and this is something that I never thought growing up I would be involved in, activism and politics. I got involved, I was busy minding my life and my business, studying mechanical engineering at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. I lived in Khayelitsha since I came to Cape Town. And I went to school in Khayelitsha, primary school and high school in Khayelitsha. And I'd always been good at math, mathematics. And so the only career that I saw myself that was linked to mathematics at the time, it was engineering. And so I went to study mechanical engineering at CPUT. I was introduced to this idea or this politics and activism while I was studying at CPUT. I used, when at the time we still had trains, I used a train to go to varsity and would walk from the station to where I stayed in Crane Point in Khayelitsha, 10 to 15 minutes to and from. And in 2008, when the xenophobic attacks, unfortunate xenophobic attacks were happening across the country, I felt, I mean, I didn't, at the time, I wouldn't have had like the words for it, but I felt a sense of injustice in relation to what was happening when fellow African brothers and sisters were being chased, their business being destroyed, and all those things. And that violence was erupting. And I didn't know what to do. I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what to do. And at the same time felt powerlessness as an individual that wants to do something and intervene. Fortunately, there was an organization that had been started as a response to that, the Social Justice Coalition. And I spoke to someone about this issue, and I was invited to a meeting. And so my activism and my politics and my political life began with me going and attending that meeting in Khayelitsha in 2008 and going to listen in relation to what was happening. And this was an organization that was working with trying to get the police to intervene, trying to get government in general to intervene, and organizing humanitarian support for people that were displaced, but also doing education activities in different communities. One, this idea of a listening politics to understand what were the issues, why were people doing what they were doing, but also trying to speak to people about the history of our country in relation to Africa, the history of our country in relation to the underlying systemic and structural issues that lead people to be angry at our politicians. Because essentially what came out was that South Africans were angry, as they continue to be today.
Yeah.
And they just misdirected that anger to the wrong people. And instead of directing that anger to the government that has failed, because the things that we had people were complaining about were jobs,
Sure.
it was employment, it was safety, it was basic services. And this was 15 years ago. And it's very interesting hearing Steenhuisen talk now, because at that time, that was when the Western Cape government,
Yeah.
the DA, started to lead the Western Cape government. And so they've been in power as long as I have been an activist. And so it's very interesting to hear the things that he says about the Western Cape in relation to the RISE campaign as well in the province.
Yeah. And I want us to get into the remarks of John Steenhuisen, who's the leader of the official opposition in the country, the Democratic Alliance. But I think it's very interesting to me, that you mentioned that your activism journey started with the Social Justice Coalition and you were dealing with xenophobia, because a lot of people know your activism to be about looking at racial inequality in the city of Cape Town, that we all know tells the story of two South Africas, I think, more than any other province in the country. The inequality of our country is on display, and it's stark, right? So a lot of people know you to be dealing with issues like that, issues of racial inequality, issues to do with housing and human settlements, because we know that there's also a big issue around informal settlements in the Western Cape. And I think that just goes to show how social justice issues or socioeconomic issues are actually very intersectional.
Yeah.
And so you might start off doing the one thing, but ultimately you realize that we are not able to solve for these issues in silos, because ultimately they are all intersectional. So, how do you then find yourself going from Social Justice Coalition and trying to solve for that issue in 2008 when there was the xenophobic violence? Now we managed to quell the violence. How do you continue your work as an activist, and how do you get into the space of dealing specifically with issues around race?
I mean, part of, I mean, what you're saying also gets me to think, just having been involved over the last year or so within RISE Mzansi,
Sure.
and having to be, for RISE Mzansi to be in the ballot in all 9 provinces and at the national level, and having introduced our candidates, we get these questions from people who are saying, but what experience do you have? We trust you that you know how to govern, that you can govern. And it's very interesting because people assume that, particularly people that are in civil society or that are activists, they assume that all we do is protest and all we do is shout at politicians.
Yeah.
The work that we have done and had done with the Social Justice Coalition since 2008 was also informed by activist work that had been done before. So amazing work that was done by the Treatment Action Campaign around the issue of HIV and AIDS, where activists and community leaders, people who didn't have necessarily degrees or qualifications in health, were able to study the virus and study issues around HIV and AIDS. And they were able to go and educate communities, and they were able to do the work to advocate for issues and such as ARVs, for example. And that wasn't just shouting, it was having to understand the issue at a very basic level and
Sure.
having to explain the issue to people at a very basic level. And that's the work that many of us have been doing. So when that issue of xenophobia started, we had to sit down and say, this is an outcome of something that is happening. And our job is to understand what is the underlying issue, what is the underlying systemic issue that's leading to this. And that's when we got to understand that people are unemployed, people complain about all the issues of lack of service delivery, housing, education, and all these things. We chose two issues with the Social Justice Coalition. That at the time we thought these could be issues that could be easier to champion and would get results. And I guess as people who trusted the leaders that we had elected, there was some naivety in relation to that, because we thought we could campaign and we could speak to politicians and they would listen and they would change things. And that was the idea in 2008. But we are here now because those things haven't happened. And we've gotten to understand that part of the issue is the people that we have elected. And hence say we need new leaders, because the leaders that we've had have not listened to people in the Western Cape in particular, but across the country, at least in the Western Cape in the last 15 years. And so it meant for us, we had to understand these issues. We had to understand that the inequality in the province of the Western Cape, the inequality in the city of Cape Town, the inequality in the country is not sustainable. The gang violence that we see is as a result of poverty. It is as a result of inequality. And there was a report about some muggings in Table Mountain and tourists. And I responded to that to say, this is a result of inequality. This is a result of unemployment. This is a result of poverty. And I've continued to say that the extortion that many of us talk about in townships, when there is nothing more to extort in the townships, every one of us will be affected. And I say that I was talking about this issue of gun violence and guns and people hearing bullets. And I'm sitting comfortable. I'm in Salt River. I'm in my apartment. And it's safe. But just for me to be safe and to be comfortable in Salt River doesn't mean tomorrow I will be safe. Because we're living in the same city. It might be 25, 30 kilometers away where these things are happening, but it's the same city, it's the same province, it's the same country. And so these inequalities are not sustainable. And hence we have to do something, particularly with those of us that have at least the privileges and the social capital to do something. And this is what RISE Mzansi has done and continues to do. People attack and say RISE Mzansi people are middle class and so on and so forth. Clever blacks. What we've said is that we're using the privilege that we have. We're using the social capital that we have. Not everyone is able to leave their jobs and start to do this work within politics. It's people that can afford to do that. And there's many South Africans across the country. And that's what we've said as RISE Mzansi. We're inviting many South Africans that have the social capital to do these things. And so the inequalities that we have been dealing with since 2008, at least myself, with the Social Justice Coalition, have continued. And I continue to say it is unsustainable. What affects someone in Manenberg today, that gun violence, one of the field organizers there, when we're talking about this event for tomorrow, I said, I can't go out. It's difficult, even though we are going to Mitchell's Bay, another gang-ridden community with gun violence. She said, I can't go out. She had her son shot by a stray bullet last year. And so it's not easy for her to risk that. And the work that we do is to make sure that we are all safe. And our work for next week is going to focus on all those issues, particularly how do we keep people safe.
Yeah, I'm so glad that there's a moth trying to disturb our conversation. I'm so glad that you made that segue into next week's theme, which looks at freedom from fear. And I absolutely love how we've chosen to phrase that, because that's what being safe and secure ultimately gives us access to, the ability to feel that we have the right to freedom by feeling that we do not have to fear, right? But we're going to get into that a bit later on. I think as you're speaking, I'm realizing that even myself, sometimes you hear about gun violence and you hear about violent crimes in particular communities. But I think as South Africans, we've become desensitized because we live in a country that comes from violence and that is still violent. And so when we hear about 9 people being shot, or people getting shot at a tavern, and it happens over time, it becomes so desensitized that these stories almost don't move us anymore. And it's difficult for those of us who, like you mentioned, Axolile, have the privilege to live in safer communities. I won't say safe because none of us are safe. Safer communities. We don't know the reality of what it feels like to live in a community where you are afraid to step outside because you may not come back home, where you're afraid to step outside because the sound of guns and bullets going off is literally the background music to your life. And I think about that, and I think about that as the reality of a lot of people living in the Western Cape. And then I think about the leader of a party like the DA, John Steenhuisen, who celebrates the work of the party in the province over the past 15 years, who speaks about this, the Western Cape and the city of Cape Town as the best run province in the country, the safest province just the best place to live in the country because the DA has managed to produce the most well-run province. The Western Cape is spoken of as an example of what South Africa's potential is, what South Africa could be, if we just had the Democratic Alliance in power. But the picture that you paint does not resonate with that. It absolutely does not resonate with those remarks. And I think for me, that speaks about a leadership that is so far removed from the realities of the people, so far removed from the realities of communities. And so with that being said, I want us to get into the remarks of the leader of the DA, because they caused quite a storm on the other social media platform on X, where he was basically saying that parties such as RISE Mzansi should not be campaigning in the Western Cape. We should leave the Western Cape alone because the DA has done such an incredible job. And so I want you to first of all respond to that. For some people who do not follow you on Twitter, who may not know how you feel, I want you to respond to that. But in your response, I also want you to talk about what a danger that is for our democracy, what a danger that is for a democracy that is vibrant, a democracy that is growing, a democracy that is maturing, and a democracy that was fought for with blood, for someone to almost want to stand on a platform and claim ownership of a province and say no one else should campaign there because that party is doing such an incredible job.
I mean, the 27th of April is Freedom Day. And this is when many people were able to exercise in 1994 their democratic right to vote. Many people, Black people, colored people, and many others that weren't able to vote before were able to exercise their right to vote. And that's what 1994 allowed people. That's what that democracy, the attainment of that democracy, allowed people. And for a party that is called the Democratic Alliance, or the leader of a party that is called the Democratic Alliance, it boggles the mind. The types of utterances that he just, the things that he says about contesting, other parties being able to contest an election in democratic South Africa. It's not really as surprising, but it's still shocking. It's not surprising because we know there are parties and there are people within the province of the Western Cape that see this province as something that's separate from South Africa. And we are all South Africans. In the Western Cape, is a South African province, and it will continue to be a South African province. And so it cannot and should not be treated differently. And we have the right to contest the Western Cape. We have the right to contest all the other provinces, as we are doing. And for him to stand on a public platform and say we're only contesting in the Western Cape, when we have so many volunteers across the country, we've shown in different platforms and in different way, whether through our postering, whether through our activities, whether through Songezo himself visiting all the 9 provinces as part of his campaign, through many other national leaders visiting all the provinces as part of the campaign, having 9 provincial conveners. And so he comes on a platform and lies, actually, and say we are targeting the Western Cape. And so it's just shocking. It's not surprising, but it still is shocking. The Western Cape will be contested, and we are going to contest the Western Cape. I guess for them, maybe the unfortunate part is that the DA hasn't had a real party that is able to contest many of the lies that they tell the rest of the country. There hasn't really been a true and real alternative. There hasn't really been a true and real opposition to the DA in the Western Cape. A huge part of the opposition work in the Western Cape has been done by civil society, through civil society.
Yeah.
And the strength, at least, of RISE Mzansi is that it is people that are entering politics, some of them who have been in civil society. And hence we pose a threat, because we have already been the opposition outside, I guess, of the benches of the legislature or the benches of the National Assembly within the Western Cape province. And that's what threatens the DA now, is that we will be able now to take some of the things and some of the advocacy inside the provincial legislature and show the mess that this province also is in relation to the many other parts of the province that the DA doesn't show in their PR, because that's the big thing with the DA province. They've got a huge PR and media machine, which blinds many people who haven't experienced the Western Cape, as many of us who have lived here have. And so they're easy to sell these shiny parts of the city of Cape Town and of the province without to show the ugly parts of the province. And so for Steenhuisen to go on that platform and lie, we have to call him out, and we will call him out. We will call his party out. We will contest the Western Cape. We have organizers across the province that are working and doing the work. We have volunteers across the province. We go to as many communities and engage with people in many communities that are affected by the failures of the DA for the past 15 years. People who don't have toilets, people who don't have water, people who don't have electricity, where sewerage is in the streets, people who cannot eat because it smells, it stinks, rubbish is not collected. This is in the same province where the DA says it's the best run province. All these things are happening in the Western Cape. Only happening outside of the Western Cape, they're happening in the Western Cape. The city of Cape Town has just released its draft budget, and I was going through it, and they say that since 2010, 2011, murder in the Western Cape has increased by over 50% up until 2020, 2023. You can't say that's a best run province. And we know the city and the province will blame national government, as is the modus operandi of the DA. There's nothing that the DA will say is our fault. There's nothing. Everything that is failing in the province, it's either the ANC's fault or it's the fault of the people that are coming from the Eastern Cape or other provinces to the Western Cape. It's not the fault of the failures of the DA,
Mm.
of the city of Cape Town, or of the Western Cape province. They will blame everyone else except for them with these failures. And as I've said, the issue of crime, the issue of violent crime, is as a result of the underlying systemic and structural issues. It is as a result of spatial apartheid that the DA hasn't done anything about. It is as a result of inequality and poverty that the DA hasn't done anything about. It's easy for them to brag about the number of jobs that they have created.
Mm.
But the reality is, many of the people that have those jobs, all they do is work so that they can get back to that job because
Sure.
they don't have affordable and cheap public transport system. And so you give someone a job and then you give them a little amount of money that you pay them. All they can do is use that money to go to that job.
Come back
That's
to work. Yeah.
So you can't brag about that if you aren't dealing with the other issues. You can't brag about just giving someone a job without making sure that that person is able to feed people with that money that they get from that job. It's
Mm.
not 40% of that salary on public transport. They're not spending 40% of that salary on public transport for their kids because the schools that they send their kids to are in far places. They're not in these townships because in these townships, there's shootings happening on a daily basis. So people would rather send their kids to schools that are far away. So if you
Yeah.
don't about with those things, you can't brag about these little
Yeah.
things you're able to do.
Yeah. And I think, Axolile, one of the things that you are so good at doing is painting a picture of what life looks like for the people that the DA doesn't talk about who live in Cape Town, the people, as you've said, who do not make it as part of the DA's PR campaign. And I think that's so incredibly necessary because I mean, for someone like me, for example, who's lived in Johannesburg their whole life, I have no idea what the lived experiences of a Black person who lives in a township in the Western Cape is like. And I think that just talks so powerfully about the importance of engaging with communities and grassroots activism, and really RISE Mzansi's model of organizing, which is from the ground up. But
Mm.
something that stood out for me as you were speaking is you said that there hasn't been a viable alternative to oppose the DA in the Western Cape. And a lot of the work has been done by civil society.
Yeah.
And that's interesting for me because I remember when we announced you as our Western Cape Premier candidate, there was some conversation, again, on that other platform, X, about how, oh, Axolile is now on the other side of activism. Because oftentimes, as activists, like you mentioned, a lot of the job is opposing politicians. A lot of the job is holding politicians accountable. A lot
Yeah.
of activists don't like politicians, right? I think, in fact, that's why a lot of people like myself who are in civil society may have struggled with the idea of getting into electoral politics.
Yeah.
And so there's this narrative that you are either or. You are either an activist or
Yeah.
you are a politician. And once you become a politician, there's absolutely no way you can continue doing the work of advocating for communities.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin is the fact that we need the activists to become politicians.
Mm.
We need the activists to be the people who are in legislature, who are making laws. We need the activists in parliament because they have the best understanding of what the issues are. They have been working with communities, they have been on the ground. They know firsthand what the issues communities are grappling with, but most importantly, they have solutions.
Mm.
One
Yeah.
of the things that someone said during training this week is that South Africa is not short of good ideas. South Africa is not short of good policies, even. What
Mm.
we actually lack is the leadership to put those things into action.
Yeah.
And so activists know how to solve the problem. It's just that a lot of the time there's no vehicle to ensure that they become the people who sit in legislature, sit in parliament, and ultimately get to make laws. So I want you to talk me through that and your thoughts about this idea that activism and politics can't go together and how you reconcile the two.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is also conversations, or there are conversations that I think as activists, even activists that are not into party politics, we need to have, or those
Mm,
activists to have, about the role in which these organizations play and have to play in our constitutional democracy, not only in relation to participatory democracy, because a lot of these organizations play a bigger role in terms of participatory democracy than they do in relation to electoral democracy. And this is where I've always seen the gap, in that political parties focus more of their energy and everything and resources on electoral democracy,
mhm.
doing very little in relation to participatory democracy. And that's where some of the problems with our politics in South Africa are, because these two make up our democracy. You can't just focus just on electoral democracy, getting elected and be there, without making sure that within the 5 years of you being elected, people are able to participate in this democracy.
Sure.
And that's what politicians don't focus on, because when people participate, it means that politicians will be held to account. And so for them to run away from accountability, they don't use the spaces, because there are spaces that are created for participatory democracy through our constitution and through relevant legislation that exists in South Africa. And on the flip side, civil society organizations have focused more on the participatory nature of democracy. And because I guess we've despised politicians for a long time, we didn't want to have much of a
Mm,
say or participation in relation to electoral democracy. And that's the problem. And that's where some of the problem is. And so we need to at least, I guess, interrogate that and
mhm.
see what role can civil society organization play in relation to our electoral democracy. And there's many ways. It can either be through education and popular education. We talk about 3 ballots now. Many people are going to struggle, and that's where
Mm,
civil society could come through. Civil society organization could host debates because they have constituencies
mm,
on particular issues that they are working on. Civil society organizations could create spaces for information so that people
sure.
understand better the candidates that they supposed to vote for. And so there is a lot. But what we've tried to create and what we've tried to develop in terms of RISE Mzansi's politics is that we've said from the outset, we're not just a political party. We are also a political movement,
Mm,
because we want the work to continue on a daily basis, pre-election and post-election. Throughout the 5 years, we want the work of active citizenship to continue. And that's what movements do. And that's what political movements do. And
yes.
so I don't have to be just a politician. I can still be an activist in my community. I can still be able to
Sure.
raise many issues that I've been raising. I can still be able to advocate for the many issues that I've been advocating for. But also, we need to start to shift this idea of what it means, or what it is, what a politician is, or what it means to be a politician.
Mm,
Because again, at least we've set that for ourselves as RISE Mzansi to say our politics is rotten, because of the nature of politics that we have and the types of political parties and what happens in those political parties, many people tend to shy away from politics because of the rot that exists in the current nature of politics. But this is our democracy. It is not a democracy of these political parties and these politicians. It is our country. It is not a country of these political parties and these politicians. Therefore, we have a role to make sure that we shift the current nature of politics so that it is a politics that benefits us and benefits everyone. It shouldn't be that people hate politicians, because these are people that are paid by us. We elect them so that they can work for us. We elect them and we pay them through tax that they get from us. And so it shouldn't be.
I like that you say that so explicitly. We pay them because we do. And I think we often forget that. Yeah.
It's so mind-boggling when the president has 10, I don't know how many vehicles he had and how many bodyguards he had. He visits communities and like he's protected like from the people that elect him with these many bodyguards and these many blue light vehicles, and millions of rands are spent on this. And that's the type of politics that is rotten. And you hear commentators, you hear people saying, these RISE Mzansi ones are too nice. Politics will chew them and spit them out.
Yeah.
That's normalizing something that shouldn't be normal. The fact that politics is brutal is problematic, is a problem.
And it doesn't have to be like that.
It doesn't have to be. We shouldn't embrace politics are brutal. We should try and change the nature of politics so that it is inclusive, so that people are free to participate, are free to be involved in politics. And that's what we as activists can play a role in. That's what those of us who have come into the political sphere can play a role in. And that's why the language that we use is also important. And that's why in RISE Mzansi, we introduce certain language, certain terms. We talk about the politics of care. We talk about organizing through joy, because politics don't always have to be depressing. It needs to be an inviting space. It needs to be an inclusive space where care is at the center of everything that we do, because it is about people. Politics is about people. And we need to make sure that it's inclusive to everyone, not just those that are in political parties.
Sure. Politics is incredibly personal. And one of the things I always say during RISE Mzansi orientation is our mission statement. Talks about building a safe, prosperous, equal, and united South Africa in one generation. And then it goes on to say where our families and our communities can live a happy, dignified life. And I always emphasize on the happy, because we often don't think about happiness as a political issue.
Yeah.
We don't think about happiness as a political issue, but when you think about the things that are required in your life for you to be happy, all of them are political. Whether it's being able to go to school, whether it's being able to live in the neighborhood you like, whether it's being able to live out your sexuality, whether it's being able to live out or practice the religion of your choice, all of that has to do with politics. And so I really love how in our language and our culture at RISE Mzansi, we really do emphasize on politics being personal. And that's why politics is about people, and it's about care, and it's about listening, which I know are things that you talk about a lot, the politics of care and the politics of listening. And I'm going to ask you to expand and let us know what exactly you mean by that. But I just want to go to our comment section for a little while. We've received a few comments. I'll start with Nomzegelo Jama, excuse me, who says, one thing I find strange in, okay, no, that's not the comment, sorry. She says, Dimpho, it's true, even myself, I now have a clear picture of what is really happening in the Western Cape. Leader Axolile Zoba, my leader. I hope I said that right. As much as we hear from the news, but not so intense like this. Absolutely. Isaiah Watson says, Mr. Axolile, my leader, you keep that focus as you are rising, and we are proud of you. And I just want to add to that that we are behind you. Um, and then Nomzekelo again says, truly, the current political parties often say people by the people, but they neglect the same people. There is a strong wall between parties and people. Absolutely. Happiness and dignity. Itumeleng is saying that. And I think this goes back to what you touched on, Akolile, this idea that politics is brutal. And politics is this rough place, and politics is for a select few. And if you don't come from a certain history, or if your professional background doesn't look a certain way, then you're not going to survive politics because it's not for people like us. With the strange thing, though, is that there's this idea that politics is only for a certain few people, but it affects all of us. And so we should all be involved in politics. And so one of the problems with that narrative is that it keeps people behind their closed walls, afraid to participate, right? And that only benefits the incumbent. That only benefits the people who benefit from the status quo. When people are not participating, they are not able to ask questions. And if people aren't asking questions, they're not able to hold people accountable. And so RISE Mzansi is trying to change that political culture, as you mentioned. And again, one of the things we're doing is our citizens' assemblies, where we're trying to really place people and people's experiences at the center of our policy making, right? And listen, you spoke about the politics of listening. So just briefly, I want us to sit there for a moment, and I want you to explain to us, what is this listening politics? What is this politics of care? Why is it important that people participate and are at the center of politics?
You know, we look at the voting population. We look at how many people are registered to vote.
Yeah.
We look at the declining number of people participate and vote in our elections. And we don't really, I don't think we might do some analysis why that is, but I don't think we talk about it enough. That many people have given up because they are not listened to, they are not being heard.
Sure.
And the problem with our politics currently and politicians, one is that they don't care. The second is that I don't know how they understand this idea of responsiveness, because the challenges and the stress that many people go through in our communities, the mental health challenges that people are faced with because of the things that I mentioned, unemployment, poverty, inequality, they require people to be heard, to be listened to. And honesty in relation to this listening politics is important. And we keep emphasizing that. We keep emphasizing that when we come to your community, we're not going to lie to you. We're not going to lie to you and say we're going to build a house for you. But being listened to is important. And I know this just even outside of party politics, from the work that we've done. When you bring people into a space, people who don't have platforms where they air their anger and their frustrations, where they can talk about the things that are eating them inside, they appreciate being listened to. People who can't afford to go for mental health therapy, to afford psychologists, they appreciate being in a space where they can talk, where they can see and they can realize that they're not alone in their struggles. And hence, this idea of listening is important. Hence, this idea of care is important. And also responsiveness. When you respond to people, it's not just about saying, this is what I will do. When you say, yes, I've heard you, that is responsiveness. When you say, yes, I'm going to find out, that is responsiveness.
Sure.
When you say, yes, I don't know, I don't have an answer for you, that is responsiveness.
Yeah, I don't know, but let's figure it out together. That's also
Exactly.
responsiveness. Yeah.
That knows. I'm going to engage someone else that knows. I think about a week ago, we're engaging with a nursing school in Kailicha. I was there with Irfan and a few people from the province.
Yeah.
We're engaging with a nursing school. These were care workers that we were engaging with. And they were talking to us about their challenges in the health department. And I said, I've worked in the civil society sector around issues of land, housing, and basic services. I've worked around particularly issues of policing and safety.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough about the
Sure.
issues of health. They are very important, but we have people that have worked on these issues. We have Mark Haywood, who has worked with
Yes.
Section 57 in the Treatment Action Campaign. We'll try and arrange a meeting. We'll go and find out with him. That's responsiveness. That's what
Sure.
people need, because not being listened to goes back to the frustrations to say for people to say, I'm not gonna vote because politicians don't care. Hence, it's also very important, and this is why I'm saying we need to make sure that we merge this idea of electoral democracy with participatory democracy.
Mm,
Because for us, and I'm saying us as politicians now, to expect people who haven't participated for the 5 years in politics to expect them to have enough information to choose leaders that they
sure.
don't know, that they've never seen every 5 years. It's also unfair. It's also unfair for those people. If we want a working and maturing democracy where people participate, not just in terms of voting, but if that is very important in terms of voting,
Sure.
then we need to make sure that people participate throughout the 5 years, because those people would have tried and spoken to politicians so that when they make a vote, they make an informed vote.
Mm.
Um, they have participated and have been, and that's the
Yeah.
type of politics that we need, and that's the type of politics that we've said as RISE Mzansi we need to introduce. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a tomorrow thing. It's not going to be a next week thing.
Yeah.
That's why we have set ourselves a generational mission, because the rot and the destruction of our politics even has happened over the past 30 years. It's not something that we can change only tomorrow, but we need to have a footing inside the provincial legislature. We need to have
Mm-hmm.
a footing inside the National Assembly so that we can start to shift these politics,
Sure.
the way politics are done.
Yeah. I excuse me. I love that you talk about participatory democracy, and the need for people to be more actively engaged, not just in South Africa's political landscape, but in civic processes, democratic processes outside of just voting. Yes, voting is important. We're all going out to vote on the 29th of May, 2024. We're all going to vote RISE Mzansi. But it's also important what we do and how we continue to engage with our communities in the 5 years, in the 2 years before 2026 and the 5 years before 2029. And speaking about, before I actually ask my next question, there's a comment I want to read from Nina Frank. And she says, it's refreshing and inspiring listening to the two of you. And it gives me hope that there'll be enough people in South Africa who govern with heart. Absolutely. We need heart back in our politics. Leader, you simplified nicely, listening and responsiveness. Thank you, my leader. You have given me more points for the upcoming community engagement meetings. And so, speaking about that, Axolile, speaking about participatory democracy and speaking about the honesty as
Mm.
well, I think with which RISE Mzansi has approached politics to say, the toxic culture of South African politics has taken time to create. It's going to take time for us to unlearn that
Yeah,
and for us to introduce a new way of doing things, to introduce a new political culture.
yeah,
And it's difficult work to do, trust me. It's a huge undertaking, especially in a space where people have become so disillusioned by politics. when the trust between people and politicians is non-existent, it's very difficult to try and introduce an alternative to people. But I think because of the RISE Mzansi message being authentic, because of the message being about people at the center of everything that we do, I think that is why a lot of people and communities have resonated with the message nonetheless.
Yeah.
And speaking about people and communities, once again, I want you to talk to me about the journey of being the convener in the Western Cape. Because before you were premier candidate, you were the convener for RISE Mzansi in the Western Cape. When you go out on a daily basis with field organizers, with volunteers, and you have conversations with communities and they tell you about the issues that they are struggling with, the issues that they have been struggling with over the past 15 years, what are some of the things that come up? And what are some of the things that I think are close to your heart?
So there's a story. I mean, many people who might be listening here, who listen to this, know about the story of Uyinene,
Yeah.
who was a UCT student and was murdered. But before that, there was a story of another young woman who I'm sure many people don't know the story of.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it speaks to the nature of our politics. It speaks to this idea of privilege and inequality. There is a young a woman. Her name was Sinokolo Mafevuka. She lived in an informal settlement in Kailicha called SST.
Mm.
Sinokolo one day went to a toilet. She lives in an informal settlement. Her home doesn't have a toilet inside, doesn't have a toilet within their yard. That's the nature of informal settlements. The toilet is about 200 meters away. She went to a toilet and her parents looked for her and they couldn't find her. She was found in a communal toilet. I think this was in 2017, around 2017 or so. She had been raped and she had been murdered inside a communal toilet. And again, this is not a story that many people know about because it happened in Kailicha. It happened in a settlement. It happened to a poor, working class family. Sinokolo's family still doesn't have justice to this day. There were a few men that were arrested, but the police messed up with the evidence or whatever, the forensic and all that, and they still haven't been arrested. So I'm telling you about this because it involves a number of things that are important, particularly, and again, I think people must think about Steenhuisen and the DA and the Western Cape being the best run municipality. When we did the work that we did, when I was still with the SJC, there were two particular campaigns and issues that we worked on, which is one, this issue of sanitation services. So this touches on that. But we also worked on this issue of policing, and this touches on that. At the time, because these two services, one, water and sanitation is a local government function, and so the DA is responsible for that. But policing is a national function.
Sure.
What is happening now with Steenhuisen is the same thing that happened before, where when we were campaigning on the issue of water and sanitation, we were accused of being the ANC, of working with the ANC. And the irony of that was that we campaigned on policing at the same time, and we were accused of working with it. And these are the main issues. At the center of everything that we hear about is the issue that we are going to be talking about this week, which is the issue of safety. Safety is not just about the gun violence that we talk about. It's about what it means to be safe as a woman in an informal settlement, what it means to be safe as a kid, as a child in an informal settlement. Are you able to be a child in an informal settlement or in a township? Are you able to walk on the street in a township as a woman, and even as a man, freely and safely? And the reality is that in the Western Cape, no, as is the case in many other parts of the country. And these are the things that we hear on a daily basis. Last year, again, 4 kids, children, from ages of, I think, 7 to 12 to 13 years, lost their lives in a community in Philippi, in a community known as Marikana in Philippi. They were playing and they were electrocuted because in that community, the Western Cape government and the city of Cape Town hasn't provided electricity. That community is a community that is situated on private land, but that community fought for that land in the courts. The DA will tell you about the respect for the rule of law, the respect for the Constitution. That community was assisted by civil society organizations and public interest law organizations such as Ndifuna Ukwazi and SERI. And the Supreme Court of Appeal said the city needs to expropriate this land so that it can provide services. This was around 2018, 2019. This hasn't happened. And so those children having died are as a result of the failures of the city of Cape Town and the Western Cape government in terms of making sure that it does what the courts have said. You need to say you respect the court. Why has that land not been expropriated for so many years? And this is just the story of the 4 children that we know about. How many others would have been electrocuted in that community?
Sure.
How many others, how many women, how many people of Marikana would have been raped, would have been robbed in that community? That community doesn't have public lighting, it doesn't have toilets, it doesn't have water, it doesn't have electricity. These are the effects of the DA government that has, and I'm just talking about one out of probably over 400 informal settlements that exist just in the city of Cape Town. Not talking about the province now. And so if there are these failures, the scale, because 4 children dying, even 1 child dying, enough for us to be outraged. The scale in that one community, imagine the many other communities where children have died. So the story in Marikana, the story in SST of Sinokolo Mafevuka tells us about the failures of a DA-led government in the Western and in the city of Cape Town. These are the things since beginning the work as convener in the Western Cape. These are the stories that we've continued to hear with field organizers, and we always have conversations. And fortunately, we have some field organizers that have done this work in their communities. And some of them have identified and have realized that some of the stories are not only difficult for the people who are affected, they become difficult for the organizers. And so sometimes we've created spaces for organizers, for them to just talk, to be able to say, it's difficult for us to hear these stories. Let's create spaces where we can try and work out our own mental well-being, because the work that we have decided to take on becomes difficult in the mind for us as well. Our mental well-being is affected by this work, and therefore we have to try and take a break and take a rest and have conversations to say, are we okay with the things that we continue to hear?
It's as if you are reading my mind, when you talk about mental health care and mental well-being. As you spoke about Usinotolo, I'm with my mom in the living room, and she let out a deep sigh, because even though that is the reality for many, many women in this country, we live in one of the rape capitals of the world. You just never get used to hearing those kinds of stories. And I think they break your heart each time. Um, but two things. And I think the first one is when you also speak about the children who were electrocuted, it makes me think about how poor governance is not victimless.
Mm.
There are victims
Yeah.
um, who take on the consequences of poor governance. And sometimes those victims pay with their lives. And that is why good governance is essential. And that is why, as RISE Mzansi, we're saying we need new leaders.
Mm.
And we need people who are not just capable and competent and experienced, but people who are going to lead with heart, people who actually care about the communities that they come from and the communities that they represent. But speaking about mental health at Olile, which is such an important topic, but because of the nature of activism, it's always one thing after the other. Because of the nature of politics, there's often not enough time to just sit and reflect and have conversations with yourself about how everything that you're exposed to makes you feel.
Mm.
Because we try to forget about the feeling because we're always trying to do.
Yeah.
But a lot of the work that we do involves feeling. And so, my question to you is, and also because I mean, this is not, you've been an activist for years, you get arrested. That in itself is a traumatic experience. Dealing with law enforcement in South Africa, sometimes you're dealing with police who have been instructed to be brutal, especially if you're protesting. Those things are incredibly traumatic. So how does Axolile take care of his mental well-being? So when you have a bit of time to just unwind, to be yourself, to
Yeah.
not have to think about actually the premier candidates, and I know you have very little time to do that these days. What do you do? What do you do to kind of
Yeah.
yeah, to take care of your mind, and I think to restore your mind and to pour into your cup?
Mm. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of I'm thinking of the video we did now, which is on TikTok. When we're in the garden room,
You're running.
when we're I was with Hilton and
Yeah,
Ngosipon, and they were rapping. It's I mean it's those types of things. So I think we've created a space where we're not just colleagues in the
mm,
space of RISE Mzansi, but we are friends and we are family, and we can see when someone else is not their best
yeah,
self,
yeah,
because we are here to get to understand ourselves,
sure.
um, and understand the people that we work with. And so that helps quite a lot because we are able to call each other in. And again, it's very important, even when we disagree, and that language, calling out versus calling in, we're able to call each other in and have conversations and to say, I think you are struggling, you are burning out
Mm,
at times. Uh, we're on the campaign trail that sometimes we even forget to eat.
yeah,
Someone is like, "Have you eaten? You need to eat. You can't go to that next meeting without eating."
yeah,
So it, I guess it works because from the outset we have continued to say that this is going to be a politics of care. This is going to be a politics about care, where we care
sure.
not only about the issues that we work on, but we also care about each other.
Sure.
But I also have I mean, I love music. I love hip hop music, and so I
Who's your
listen to
favorite rapper?
it's the white guy. It's Eminem.
Okay. I didn't see that coming.
I get that a
Okay.
lot. So don't see that coming. Yeah, so I listen to a lot of Eminem and a lot
Yeah.
of other rappers.
Yeah.
And so music helps me even when I work sometimes and when I
Yeah.
drive. And I always talk about this in the car if I'm driving with some of the PLC members or the organizers.
Mm.
That now I'm forced to listen to the news because I have to be abreast and know what is happening in the country. While previously it would just be bumping music all the time. Now I have to
Yeah.
switch on video and listen to
Yeah.
things that are important. So I listen to music a lot and I speak to people and
Mm.
speak to the people that are within. And we try again to do these things with joy, to
Sure.
go out and enjoy ourselves, and be with the people where people are, um, and, and these are important. These things are important for our own mental well-being and for us to reflect. But also when things become really tough, it's important for us to seek professional help.
Mm.
Because sometimes we can do these things and go out and have fun as an escape, but those things remain with us. So if you aren't able to have a chance to talk with the people nearby, or if you aren't confident enough, because sometimes
Yeah.
conversations can be difficult,
Yeah.
it's important for some of us to try and seek professional help. And that's very even that is very important in the politics of RISE Mzansi because we know only certain people that can afford
Sure.
that type of thing when it comes to their mental health can be able to deal with that. And hence our approach to safety, when we talk about it in our manifesto, our approach to these things is not just about law enforcement. Do we have enough spaces in our communities for people to go and talk to professionals? And we need to try and have these conversations um, to create these spaces in our communities that are cheap, that are affordable, that don't even cost anything, because the issues that we see again, whether it's people who end up abusing drugs or abusing
Mm.
alcohol, it's because they don't have another outlet. They don't have another way of dealing with what
Sure.
is the challenges that some of them have been led to happen over the last 30 years of poverty, of unemployment. We talk
Mm.
to young, to elderly men and women, and you can hear the stress and the strain when someone talks about being unemployed, being able to take care of their family. And that is why we have such high rates of mental health and suicide in the country,
Mm.
because those spaces do not exist for people to be afforded the space to talk and to
Yeah.
air what is eating them inside.
Mm.
It's not only important for us. We take a lot as leaders when we listen. And hence, I was talking about that listening politic and responsiveness. But we also need to create those spaces for ourselves where we have people that we can
Sure.
talk to, that can listen to us. They don't have to solve our problems, but listening, being listened to, and being heard goes a long way.
I really like how you connect the issue of safety and security to socio-economic problems, which are underlying.
Mm.
The fact that mental health is a safety and security issue, the fact that unemployment is a safety and security issue, the fact that if there are young children who are not able to be in school when they're supposed to be in school,
Yeah.
that poses a threat to the
Mm.
community because they will find other ways to keep themselves busy, and that is a safety and security issue. So I really like that RISE Mzansi approaches the issue of safety holistically, and not just looking at law enforcement. But just briefly, before we move on to the next part of our conversation, I want us to just go in on this a bit more, because it is our focus area next week. We're looking at safety and security, or freedom from fear. And I'm just curious to know, what does freedom from fear mean to you? As our Western Cape Premier candidate, as the incoming Premier in the Western Cape, what does freedom from being fearful look like for Axolile and in his community? Before you answer that, I'm so sorry, I absolutely have to go to these comments. When we spoke about Eminem, it said Marshall Mathers. I don't know if that's Eminem code.
His name.
I'm completely out of my depth here, but I think you guys will understand each other. Edphinius also says the question is, can he dance? Can you dance? Yes or no? Quickly.
A bit, yes. A bit.
I think it's for you to know and for us to find out.
I can dance a bit. I can dance a bit.
We need proof. But yeah, safety and security. You know, what does that mean for you?
It means that I am free, and we are all free to open the door and walk down the street and go to the neighbor without thinking twice about it, and go to the shop without thinking twice about it. It means that as a parent, I am free to go out and go to work without thinking twice and having to worry about the child or children that I'm either living at home or that I'm either living at school. Because you worry, even if you know your child is at school, you still worry about their safety. Because it's not only the streets that are not safe, it's the schools, it's places of worship, it's our own homes, it's wherever we are. It's not being safe. And so the freedom that we talk about, and this was the conversation that we are having, I think a few days ago, about a month ago as well, in Mitchell's Plain, knowing that we are coming to this month of April, which is Freedom Month and it's Freedom Day on the 27th of April. And there was a debate at Radio Bonele as well when we were talking about this, whether we have democracy or not. And the reality is that Stian Hazen might not understand, but we do have democracy. We attained democracy in 1994. Hence, we are able to contest elections. Hence, we have the right to contest elections. Hence, we can be in debates and be able to disagree as different political parties throughout those debates. But what most of us and many of us still don't have is full freedom. Have some freedom to do certain things, but we don't have full freedom. We do not have economic freedom. We do not have freedom of movement. It might be written in the Constitution, but the fact now we are having to cancel our activity for tomorrow that we were going to have in Mitchell's Plain because there's shootings happening there. So we're no longer going to have songers who visit those communities and speak to those communities about this issue of safety, because it is not safe for those communities to talk about safety. See how like that just you want to do something and you want to have conversations about this particular issue, but it's not safe to do so. And so that's not freedom. It's not freedom when many women still worry about going out to a toilet because they might not come back, as it happened to Sinokolo. May her soul rest in peace. You worry about your children going out in the morning, and that's not freedom. And when we talk about freedom, um, the being safe and all these issues, you need to understand and know that your children can be children.
Yeah.
They can go out and play and be children just on the streets without you having to worry, not only about them getting shot and killed, but being electrocuted, being hit by a car because the streets are not safe, because people are not respecting the rule of law and they're driving recklessly and they driving drunk on the roads.
Mm.
All these things affect the safety of our communities. They affect the safety of us as well. Being hungry, not having food, that speaks to your freedom because it speaks to your freedom to go to school and be able to concentrate
Sure.
and be able to write exams. And these things are things that people, like you see the rate failure or the results, the metric results, when you see them at the end of the year, you hear people saying that people are lazy, they're not studying enough.
Yeah.
You don't have the freedom to study in your home because there's load shedding. That will affect the metric results at the end of the year. When you don't have food in the morning for you to eat before you go to school, that will affect your level of concentration because you are hungry. And all these things are things that the ANC government that has governed for 30 years have failed many of us, millions of us, in terms of us having to realize that freedom.
Yeah.
The government that has governed in the Western Cape for 15 years has failed many of us and millions of us in relation to these things. Many of our communities are taken care of by people who have nothing.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about, and we continue to talk about this issue of hunger and fruit and food, and that speaks to freedom. There are people who are not taken care of, but are able to take care of our communities in relation to starting community kitchens and all these things and feeding people who are hungry. While
Yeah.
this government has taken away money that should have gone to NGOs. NGOs where I think about 50 million rands has now been withdrawn, which would have gone to NGOs who are taking care of these communities, taking care of people who don't have homes, taking care of people who have issues of substance abuse, taking care of safety in our communities. And this is the government that is saying that they must not be contested. This is the
Mm.
same government that has just fired teachers in many schools. As I talk to you, there's chaos in many schools in the Western Cape because teachers were fired without notice. And where is freedom in that? Where is freedom
Yeah.
for those teachers? Where is freedom for the parents whose kids are not going to have teachers um, in these schools? And
Yeah.
so that freedom that we need to work for. We've attained the freedom that has allowed us to contest elections. We need to use that freedom to make sure that we attain further freedom so that we can be free in the full sense of the word.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that reflection, Axolile. I think as you're speaking and you're talking about how communities are taken care of by people that have nothing,
Mm,
I think about how um, a lot of our communities are held together by activists. They are held together quite literally by the work of activists, the work of people in civil society who don't have the resources to be doing the work that they are doing. But the people who sit with the resources, the people who sit with the funds that are meant to build our communities are not doing the work that they are meant to be doing. And that's why, once again, we say as RISE Mzansi that we truly need new leaders. We are running out of time. I actually cannot believe that we are 5 minutes before 8 o'clock. But before I ask my final question, there's a comment from Phineas who says, "I agree. Leadership. We need affordable and accessible rehabs in our community to address mental health problems. We can't police trauma." I like that. Someone says, Nomzekelo says, people use drugs and alcohol as a mechanism to cope, a mechanism of coping due to many factors, really like safe spaces in communities. And then Isaiah Watson says, brilliant points you're raising, Mr. X. You have covered the concerns that I will address here in Caledon, Overberg. It's these priorities that affect all of us. Now, my final question to you, something that I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation, and I said, we're joined by one of our young leaders. And I said, I'm not sure if you're still within the threshold of young, but you know what? You're young at heart. And you are a young person. And I think sometimes we threshold aside, we forget how young you are because of just the massive scale of the work that you have done and the impact that you have had in the communities that you've worked in. But you are a young leader. And for a young man like yourself, a young Black man like yourself, to boldly put up their hand and say, I will contest and I will stand in the gap and I will contest to be the premier of the Western Cape, which is one of the most hotly contested provinces generally, but especially in the selection, I think takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of chutzpah. So just talk to me about the internal conversation briefly that was had as you took on this role, and some of the work that you look forward to doing as the premier of the Western Cape.
So, I mean, firstly, we had these conversations, and when we just realizing the politics of the Western Cape, I've always said that whoever is the premier candidate of RISE Mzansi, we need to make sure that there is a collective of leaders that work with that premier candidate. Because what our politics have done is one, to present messiahs, and also to present the politics of division. And so I've always said that we need to have a collective of people that will represent the population, the whole population of the Western Cape. Of course, we know within that population, there has to be priorities. And many of those priorities are people that live in townships, in informal settlements, and particularly Black and colored people. And we have to prioritize those people because those are people that have not been prioritized for the last 30 years. And
Sure.
a white man called me a racist on the radio for saying that.
Yeah.
So when conversations were had, again, within RISE Mzansi, I've always said, I am happy to be part of this movement building exercise. I'm part of building RISE Mzansi as a political party. It doesn't matter which position I occupy, as long as I am going to contribute to making sure that we have the right leaders. We are able to elect the new leaders that will occupy spaces in the provincial legislature and in the National Assembly. And if that has to be me, then it's up to the RISE community and the RISE Mzansi community. I never, when like in getting into this, The first day, I never got in thinking that I'm going to be premier candidate.
Yeah.
I guess it was through the work that we were able to do. It was through the leadership, not only my leadership, but the leadership of the people that I've worked with to build RISE Mzansi in the Western Cape. And so when that conversation was had with me, again, I said, I am ready to serve in any way possible. If I'm being asked to be premier candidate, then I'm happy. But I emphasized again, as long as I will be working with a group of leaders
Sure.
that represent the population of the Western Cape, so that we can be able, everyone can be able to see someone within RISE Mzansi. We need that type of representative politics, but also we need a politics of collectives. And that's why we're the National Leadership Collective of RISE Mzansi. That's why RISE Mzansi is led by the National Leadership Collective. We
Yeah.
need to make, even at the provinces, we have those collectives that are leading the work of RISE Mzansi. It cannot be a messiah type of politics, because no
Sure.
one will be able to take us out of the rut that we are in, only if we all work together. But what I've realized as a young person, I'm still young, I'm 34 years old, I also like even this idea that many people, it's because of the politics that we know, that we understand.
Yeah.
That as a 4-year-old, I'm seen as this young leader. Um, it should be that we're celebrating a 25-year-old that is
Sure.
running as a candidate, more than I'm close to 35. I'm 35 in September this year. But it's also the realization that because our politics have been occupied by very old people,
Yeah.
and in 3 to 4 debates that I've been part of, I've also realized that being old doesn't also mean it's not directly linked that you are mature. The most immature type of politics I've seen from people that are older than me. And I keep saying that it's important that we disagree. It's important that we debate, and it's important that we have this debate where we disagree with each other. But we need to be mature about that. And people tap out of politics because of the immaturity that sometimes is brought into these politics, but people that are older, and then those people get to say, like, why are people not liking politicians, not liking the politics? It's because there is a certain level of disrespect to the people that you are talking to, that you want for you to vote for, when you are being immature on a public platform, in a stage such as John Steenhuisen was doing, when he was shouting on stage and not being immature enough to raise the concerns that he wants to raise. And so I think there's many of us who are mature enough, who are young but mature enough, and are capable of leading our country out of the rut we are in. And we need to create many of those spaces within RISE Mzansi and many other spaces, and encourage many of those young people to take the space. We must take up space. And I think it was former Miss Universe that said that we need to occupy the space, the spaces that have been occupied by others before.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess it's that type of maturity. And you use the word which I have in my bio, which is the word unlearn, which is again one of the most difficult things to do for someone, I guess, that's older. It's easier for us as people to
Sure.
unlearn because of where we are and where we've been in life. And that's one of the mottos that I use: unlearn, disrupt, and rebuild. And unlearning means that we need to create space so that we can learn new ways of doing things. And we need to disrupt spaces. And me running as premier candidate in the Western Cape
Sure.
is disrupting a space. And disrupting a space is different from distracting. We're not being destructive necessarily, but we can be disruptive in a manner that's also not chaotic. We need to disrupt in order to rebuild. And that's what Mzansi is doing. That's what we are trying to do. Unlearn the way in which you understand politics and disrupt the spaces that have been occupied by the ANC, the EFF, the DA, and all these bigger parties, and be able to rebuild a different type of politics and be able to rebuild a different type of South Africa that is safe, that is prosperous, that is equal, and that is united in one generation where we all can live happy and dignified lives.
Yeah. We need to disrupt in order to rebuild. I really like that. That's definitely a quotable. And I think it speaks so well to changing the political culture and ushering a new way of doing politics. I've taken up 5 extra minutes of your time. So, first of all, apologies for that. But I just want to thank you I'm not sure if you can still hear me. I'm getting a delay on my side. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that reflection. Before I close our conversation, one of the things you said is when you joined RISE Mzansi, you were just focused on impact. And you never thought that today you would be the Western Cape Premier candidate. And I think it's so strange and so beautiful how almost everyone at RISE has this is not part of the plan story. I was having this very same conversation with Nonkululego a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's so beautiful because it speaks to, and Itu said this in the comments, just the desire to serve. When people join RISE Mzansi, the only goal objective that they have is to serve. And as we navigate the space and we find ourselves, we often land in a place that none of us ever thought we would do. I definitely never thought I'd be in electoral politics, but that's a story for another day. But I also like what you're saying about how we celebrate a 34-year-old who's stepping up to lead, but it should be the norm. It should be the norm in a country where a third of the population is young. For young people to take up key and strategic roles, not just in politics, but in other corners of society as well. And I think it's so beautiful and inspiring to see that happening with you and with all the other young leaders that we have at RISE Mzansi. I said last week again that the youngest member of the National Leadership Collective is 21 years old. And he doesn't just lead student chapters on the side. No, he sits in the NLC. And when he speaks, he's listened to like everyone else. And so thank you for sharing that. But also thank you for this conversation. I always think I know you until I hear you speaking, and I just realize that there's just so much more from where all of what we see comes from. And we are absolutely behind you. You are doing incredible work. And I think we cannot wait to see how much more work you will continue to do in the Western Cape as our premier candidates, as our premier, as a member of the provincial legislature. Thank you to everyone who's joined us and has been sending us comments on Facebook and YouTube. I can't read all of them, but just to close off, Phineas says we are led. Indeed, we are led. Busi also says we are definitely the new leaders. Western Cape, you are really led leaders. Indeed. But thank you once again for joining us on this week's edition of Fireside Chats. Just a reminder before we jump off that we are premiering our very first Citizens Assembly, which took place in Johannesburg this week with Mark Haywood. And we were looking at RISE Mzansi's proposal and RISE Mzansi's proposed support for single mothers. You can watch that on our YouTube, and don't forget to leave any comments and any questions. Thank you so much for tuning in, and good night.
Thank you, Dimpho. Good night, everyone.
The first RISE Mzansi Citizens Assembly. the very first one. And the first of many, because RISE Mzansi has recognized that South Africa, in our constitution, is a participatory democracy. What that means is we don't just go and vote every 5 years and then let government get on with it. We participate continually. But what we're doing with these citizens' assemblies is inviting people who are activists and leaders on particular issues, people who are experts and academics, to come and engage with the ideas that we are putting forward in our manifesto and in our thematic papers. And not just to come and clap, but to come, if necessary, critique, if necessary, to make suggestions about better ways of doing things. Why are we rising up for single mums? And Makashule will answer this, but let me just give you one statistic that I heard a few days ago. 45% of children in South Africa live with one parent. And of that 45% who live with one parent, 93% are mums. And I'm going to ask Makashule now to talk about why that is the case, but also what RISE Mzansi is suggesting should be done to support single mums in a thematic briefing note that I would encourage everybody to read, which we issued this week. Thank you, Makashule. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. So for those that might not know me, it's Makashule Ghana. I was raised by a single mother. Even as a child, you see the hardship that she went through. There's the burden of caring for your children and providing for them. But in many instances, there's also the burden of caring for your parents. You know how hard it is to be a woman in South Africa, and to be a single mother with children. It's double hard. That's why we focus on single mothers. When we get to Parliament, what we are going to fight for. One is the tax relief. The second aspect for the unemployed single mothers, or those that are earning to qualify for a child support grant, we say immediately we need to be able to raise the child grant to be at least at the level or just above the poverty line, because currently the child support grant, and Michael might cover that, it's sitting below the poverty line. It's less than 550, and the poverty line is 680. The third intervention, which Tsepo will speak to, it's around the early childhood development, which stops many mothers even to look for a job. The fourth one, which this one is targeted at us men. There are a lot of us as men who do not pay maintenance for our children. We need to strengthen the maintenance code. And the final intervention, which of the five, it's the maternity leave, that we amending the basic conditions of employment for single mothers, or for women who are raising children on their own, to have a longer period of maternity leave that will be fully paid by the employer. So those are the five key interventions that, as RISE Mzansi, we are proposing to ease the burden of care on single mothers.
So my name is Dimpho Lekgeu. I am a 35-year-old mother of two. It would be beautiful to have a tax rebate, but I want to touch on what Mr. Ghana had said. There's a lot of things that you didn't mention, sir. There is medical aid that you didn't consider. When we look at house subsidies, it's either you are getting too much to apply for government subsidy, or you are just, you just have to go to buy a house, even if you do not afford it, but because you just want a better environment for you and your kids, you would move in there. Not considered water and rates and taxes, which are extremely high, especially if you're a single mom, having to take care of the kids, the food, and everything. So if we can get rebated on the things that we are paying on a monthly, on a daily actually, before we go to a weekly and the monthly, because also the schools, the areas we move to, the schools are sometimes either they're expensive or if you get subsidized maybe for uniform and whatnot, you are not going to be considered because you earn a certain salary. And with that salary, I'm struggling as it is. They have this thing that middle class people are not struggling. They are the most struggling people. So being the firstborn in a black community, black tax is always there. And it is extremely hard having to look after your family because they do not qualify. My mom is 57. She is unemployed. She cannot get a job now. She doesn't qualify for old people grant. So she's relying on 350. So that means that I need to make sure that I look after her. And then looking after her, it means that it is taking from the little money that I have. And when you are a black female, it also gets more difficult because our salaries, when we look at same person doing the same job, and it's a female, but white or Indian, our salaries are not the same. Same experience, same qualification and all. Because you're black, you are just getting, the little of the cake. So those are the things that I'm struggling from. My kids, I need to either fetch my mom from Soweto so that she can come look after my kids if I have to go on weekends and do extra jobs that I do on the side to make sure that when the month ends, everything is covered for. So I have extra jobs also that I am doing, trying to make sure that my kids, they're not living a comfortable life, but they're living an okay life.
What this discussion is already showing is that there's a multiplicity, there's many, many issues that confront single mums in a way that's harder than or exacerbate life. Access to transport, safety and security, access to housing, continuing racial discrimination at work, a bunch of issues and reasons why I think we're right to draw attention to you and to many other people who are in a similar situation to yourself. So, Michael, you've heard Ntabi. You've had a look at the proposal that RISE has made around tax relief. I'm keen to hear now from you as a budget and financial specialist what you think are the issues.
I think it's excellent that RISE is attempting to mobilize single mothers behind a political platform. Like Magashule, I also am the child of a single mother, bless her soul. And so while I didn't grow up in poverty, even as Ntabi Singh says, mothers who are not necessarily growing up in poverty, but nevertheless any single mother is a superhero and deserves something from us, because as Ntabi Singh is studying and raising children and working, she is not only making a contribution to her family, but she is making a contribution to the nation. So the child support grant is currently around 530 Rand a month. And the proposal is to raise it to 680. So like by 150 Rand or something there. And I think that's quite reasonable. On the PIT rebate that is being proposed, I think I want to just clarify for you what the implication is. Because the idea is that if you earn less than 100,000 Rand, let's say, a year, which I think is about 8,000 Rand a month. Right? So you can imagine people you know who may be earning that amount. If you earn below that, you're not eligible for a child support grant. But you begin to be taxed. If you earn more than 100,000, that's when you start paying taxes. But our tax system is incredibly progressive. And what that means is a person who earns 100,000 Rand a year only pays every year in tax about 700 Rand. So the 30,000 Rand tax rebate, I mean, one thing you would need to clarify, are you saying that person now would get 30,000 Rand? Or are you saying you're gonna discount their 700 Rand tax bill and say you don't have to pay any taxes? I'm assuming it's the latter. It's only when you're in the region of 250 to 300,000 Rand. Once you earn that amount of money, then you're looking at a tax bill of about 30,000 Rand. So this measure would benefit more the middle class earning taxpayers.
Michael mentioned early childhood development, so did Magashule, which now allows us to turn on to Sepho, an expert and an advocate on all issues to do with early ECD, as we call it, and an issue that is very fundamental, of course, to single mums in particular. Over to you, Sepho.
Today we're here under the banner of single mothers and how we can support single mothers. And RISE's analysis is absolutely correct that there's a disproportionate burden on single mothers in caring for young children. But also more generally, there's a burden on women of color in the care economy. Because when we're looking at the ECD space also, it's mostly run by black women within township and rural areas, as Michael has said. And how I want to link here single mothers and early childhood development is that we have to emphasize and put our attention on the interconnectedness of mother's well-being and how that connects to the child's holistic development. Wise husbands will tell you that happy life, happy wife. I could say that a happy child is also a happy mother. The context of ECD, we often just speak about ECD and take for granted thinking that people understand what ECD is. And some of the understanding on the ground is that ECD is just a center or a creche. But that is actually quite far from the truth. Early learning programs or ECD centers, creches, form part of the umbrella term that is early childhood development. When we are talking about early childhood development, we're not talking about a particular place, but we're talking about a period of time that a child is in, from inception until 6 years old. This is a period of time where the child is going through significant developmental development in their bodies. So there's the brain development where neural pathways are being connected. And a child can pick up to 3 or 4 languages in this time because the brain is just working so hard in forming these connections. The body is developing fine motor skills, gross motor skills. All of these things are happening at an exponential rate in these first 6 years. So if you look at a child in this period of time, you have to know that right now in front of you, they are going through early childhood development. So in our understanding then in policy making, we ought to recognize that the approach to early childhood development goes beyond the center, but looks at the child's holistic development in the home, in the communities, in centers, in clinics. Everywhere a child finds themselves, there ought to be support for their holistic development.
I think it's now time to open up for any questions from people who are with us in the audience. I particularly want to hear from single mums.
What about women who are not getting the child support grant?
Our proposal is to raise the child support grant to at least to the lowest of the poverty lines, food poverty lines. What we do say as RISE Mzansi is that in order to combat, the hunger that is there in society, there needs to be some form of government income grants and also food vouchers.
2 things. So firstly, I know that there was a time when a lot of the creches that exist, and I speak under correction here, in townships specifically, you find that is, ukoko muntu, the local friendly granny who doesn't necessarily have anything that she's doing, but she's great with kids, she's raised other people's children, and so her home kind of becomes a creche. What is the current capacity for training people like that who already exist in our communities to be able to, I guess, formally be recognized as people who run ECD centers. The second thing, and I will ask you to, especially the single moms in the room, fight the urge to throw a punch. What do we say to the people who, follow a specific or adhere to a specific culture or specific faith when we propose something like a tax rebate or support for single moms, and the question that they have for us is, who sent you to go have a child outside of wedlock? Oh. And why should my tax rands support somebody who did not have the presence of mind to make a sound decision about who they're having a child with? And I ask this as a single mother myself.
The first point was on people within communities already taking care of children. You are absolutely right that these communities are raising children, and that is happening. However, where there are more than 6 children at one place and being cared for in sort of a setting like an ECD, there requires to be registration of that facility. It is absolutely true that registration is a nightmare. One key opportunity where this can be immediately addressed is with the Children's Act and the part that speaks on early learning programs. Because in there's recommendations for a one-stop shop for registration of ECD centers.
We're talking about something that is urgent now. So those that are passing judgment to say, I don't want my tax supporting the children that were born out of wedlock. The children are here, the child is here. What is our responsibility to that child now?
My name is Dudu Zile. I'm a single mother of 3. I'm unemployed. I do not qualify for the child support grant. I do not qualify for SRD. What my question stems from is asking RISE Mzansi to look at a procedure for people to qualify for this SASSA as single parents so that they can get something on the table for their children. As much as this 530 rands in Ingani, by you saying it out loud, it sounds Ingani. But for me, now, as a single parent, it means the world.
What Dudu Zile was raising is that I think there is a space, Michael, wherein we are able, because if you are employed, you earn over the SASSA upper limit, then you don't qualify for SASSA, but at least with us, you will qualify for this grant, for the tax relief. But then when you get let go or you lose your employment, you get the UIF. There's a space to link the UIF and the SASSA.
Now, Umama there was talking about some things being Ingani, and I will remind you that the National School Nutrition Program per child, per day, is 5 rand. Now, you go out and try and buy a nutritious meal for 5 rand. I don't see why, from a needs point of view, I think it would be very effective to expand that program, which has been working effectively, so that children can actually have at least 2, if not 3 meals, nutritious meals a day at school.
We must hear the questions from online. Dimpho, do we have any questions?
RISE Mzansi's proposal to increase the child support grant. So the question was, what is the figure that RISE Mzansi has come to, and how did they arrive at that?
What the basis that we are arguing that the child support grant needs to be increased to 680 is because that is the food poverty line. That's the lowest of the lowest.
Also, Lucy Mabitsela. I just want to read her out because she's coming to us all the way from Limpopo, Bloberg municipality. She's in the rural area, 48 years old, unemployed, raising 3 kids. Want to know, how are you going to help us as single mothers because we're not qualifying to get jobs? Please, please can we get help? I think that's a plea that speaks on behalf of many single mums in rural areas. And we hear you. I'm going to just very, very briefly ask each panelist if they have anything. You only got a few seconds. Final that you want to say, any final comment?
Yeah, thank you so much. Just sincere gratitude for centralizing mothers and also children in RISE Mzansi's work. And just for everyone and anyone listening is to really be intentional about representing children.
It's a great idea to do these kind of things. My only criticism is that there are not enough men in the audience and there are not enough women on the panel. But apart from that, well done.
Thank you so much to RISE Mzansi for considering single mothers.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the audience, the panelists as well, for confirming that this is an issue worth fighting for. There are some great ideas that we have received from the panelists, but also from the audience. Thanks very much. We'll take that into account as we develop our offer. And it is for this reason that as RISE Mzansi, we say that we need new leaders.